It was 7:30 p.m. on a Friday night at the Oak and Ember, and the restaurant was already drowning in noise. Every single table was full. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the heat radiating from the kitchen, and the sound of clinking silverware, loud conversations, and shouting chefs filled the air. It was the kind of chaotic night that every restaurant employee dreads. But for the manager standing in the center of the dining room, it felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The manager was a man who usually took pride in his control, but tonight his grip was slipping. He was running on just 4 hours of sleep and a cup of cold coffee. To make matters worse, disaster had struck before the doors even opened. The head chef had called in sick with a high fever, leaving the kitchen in the hands of a sous chef who was talented but easily overwhelmed. On top of that, 2 servers had texted minutes before their shift to say they weren't coming in. This left the floor short-staffed and the customers impatient. The manager moved through the dining room like a storm cloud. He wasn't walking. He was speed-walking from the kitchen to the bar, his tie loosened and sweat gathering on his forehead. His face was red, not from the heat but from the sheer frustration of putting out fires all night long. He carried a stack of heavy plates in one hand and barked orders at a passing busboy to clear table 4 immediately. The staff knew that look in his eyes. They knew to stay out of his way. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. A couple at a window table waved their hands angrily, trying to get his attention because their steaks were taking too long. At another table, a woman was complaining that her wine wasn't cold enough. The manager forced a fake, tight smile, apologized to the couple, and promised them a free dessert, but the moment he turned his back, the smile vanished. He let out a loud, heavy sigh and rubbed his temples. He felt a throbbing headache starting right behind his eyes. In the kitchen, the chaos was even worse. The new line cooks were struggling to keep up with the tickets piling up on the screen. The manager stormed into the sweltering kitchen to check on an order. The heat hit him like a wall. "Where is the salmon for table 12? He shouted over the noise of the sizzling grills and clanging pans. "It's been 20 minutes. The sous chef looked up, panic in his eyes. "I'm working as fast as I can, boss. The grill is backed up. We don't have time for excuses," the manager snapped, slamming his hand on the metal counter. "Get the food out." He turned on his heel and marched back out onto the floor, his blood boiling. He felt like he was carrying the weight of the entire restaurant on his shoulders. He felt disrespected by the staff who called out, annoyed by the kitchen crew who couldn't keep up, and unappreciated by the customers who just kept complaining. He was a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Just as he was about to scream at a hostess for seating a large group in the wrong section, the front door opened. A bell chimed softly, cutting through the noise for a split second. An older man walked in. He didn't look like he belonged in the middle of this frantic environment. He was perhaps in his late 60s, with kind wrinkles around his eyes and a calm demeanor. He was wearing a simple tweed jacket that looked a bit worn, as if he had owned it for years, and he carried a book under his arm. He didn't have a phone in his hand, and he didn't look annoyed by the noise or the long wait. The old man stood patiently by the host stand while the young hostess frantically tried to answer 3 phone calls at once. She looked like she was about to cry. The manager watched from a distance, his jaw set, wondering if he should go over and send the man away, telling him the wait was too long. But before he could move, the hostess hung up the phone and turned to the guest with an apologetic smile. "I am so sorry for the wait," she said breathlessly. "Do you have a reservation?" The old man shook his head gently. "No, I don't. I was just passing by and smelled the food." "It looks wonderful." The manager walked over then, stepping in with an aggressive energy. "We are fully booked tonight with a 45-minute wait for walk-ins," he said bluntly. He didn't say welcome, and he didn't smile. He just wanted the man to leave so he could deal with the real problems. The old man didn't seem offended by the rude tone. He just looked at the manager with a peaceful expression. "I understand. Do you happen to have a small table? Somewhere quiet? I don't mind waiting. I have my book." The manager looked around the packed room. The only spot left was a tiny, wobbly table tucked away in the dark back corner, right next to the emergency exit. It was the worst table in the house, usually used for storage. He decided to give it to him, hoping the man would eat quickly and leave. "Fine," the manager said, pointing a finger toward the back. "You can take the table in the corner, but you have to order now. The kitchen is swamped." The hostess looked terrified that the manager was being so rude to a guest, but the old man just nodded kindly. "That is perfectly acceptable. Thank you." He followed the hostess to the back corner, maneuvering carefully through the crowded aisles of the bustling restaurant. He sat down on the slightly uneven chair and didn't complain. He placed his worn book on the table and looked around with interest, watching the drama of the dinner service unfold like a play. A few minutes later, a young waitress approached his table. She was clearly new, her hands were shaking slightly, and she looked exhausted. She had been running around all night dealing with rude customers and had already been yelled at twice by the manager. She was terrified she was going to mess up again. "Hi," she said, her voice quiet and shaky. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" The old man looked up at her and saw the stress on her face. His expression softened. "You look like you've had a long night, my dear," he said gently. "Take a deep breath. I'm in no rush." The waitress blinked, surprised by his kindness. It was the first nice thing anyone had said to her all night. It is pretty crazy," she admitted. "I can see that," the old man said. "I think I'll keep it simple. Just a glass of water, please. And for dinner, perhaps the grilled chicken with the steamed vegetables. Nothing too complicated for the kitchen." The waitress let out a breath of relief. "Okay, that sounds great. I'll get that water right out for you." She hurried away, feeling a little lighter. Meanwhile, the manager stood near the kitchen pass, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. He watched the old man sitting alone in the corner, reading his book in the dim light. For a brief second, the manager felt a pang of guilt for being so harsh, but the feeling quickly vanished as a tray of glasses shattered in the dining room, echoing like a gunshot. The manager closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his temper rising again. He had no idea that the quiet man in the corner was about to become the biggest mistake of his career. The night was far from over. The kitchen was reaching a boiling point, both literally and figuratively. The ticket machine was spitting out long white slips of paper like a never-ending stream of bad news, each one representing another order for the tired cooks to struggle with. The manager stood by the pass, watching plates come out that were plated messily or were slightly cold. He sent them back with a clang of the metal bell, shouting instructions that were half lost in the noise. His head pounded with a rhythm that matched the chopping knives in the kitchen. He felt trapped in a cage of his own making, responsible for everything but in control of nothing. In the middle of the dining room, the young waitress was trying her best to keep it together. She was new, and nights like this felt like a test she was failing. Her feet ached, her uniform felt sticky, and every time she walked past the manager, she felt her stomach drop, worried she would be the next one to get yelled at. She grabbed a bottle of red wine and a glass from the bar, taking a deep breath. She had to serve the quiet man in the corner. He had been so nice earlier, and she wanted to make sure she got this right. She didn't want to disappoint him. She navigated the crowded floor, dodging a busboy carrying a bin of dirty dishes and apologizing to a customer she almost bumped into. She could feel the sweat on her back. She finally reached the small corner table where the old man sat reading his book. He looked peaceful, a small island of calm in the storm of the restaurant. She forced a smile and reached over to place the glass on the table. Just as the glass touched the wood, a waiter rushing behind her with a tray full of heavy pasta dishes stumbled. He bumped into her shoulder hard. It wasn't a huge push, but it was enough. The waitress lost her balance. Her hand slipped, and the bottle of red wine tipped over. It felt like time slowed down. She watched in horror as the dark red liquid gushed out of the bottle, not just onto the table, but splashing across the old man's worn tweed jacket and onto his open book. The glass fell onto the floor and shattered with a loud, sharp crash that silenced the conversations at the nearby tables. The waitress froze, her hands hovering in midair. Her face turned pale white. She looked at the red stain spreading on the man's sleeve, soaking into the fabric, and then down at the broken glass on the floor. Panic seized her chest. She knew how strict the manager was about breakage and waste. She knew she was going to be screamed at in front of everyone. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard she could barely get the words out. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to, She felt tears stinging her eyes, hot and embarrassing. She looked around for a towel, a napkin, anything, but she just stood there paralyzed. The old man, however, didn't jump up in anger. He didn't shout or make a scene. He calmly closed his book, shaking the droplets of wine off the pages, and set it down away from the puddle. He looked at the dark stain on his jacket, then up at the terrified girl standing over him. He saw that she was shaking, and his heart went out to her. He could see she wasn't clumsy. She was just a kid and over her head in a chaotic environment. "It is quite all right," he said, his voice steady and low. He stood up slowly and grabbed a handful of napkins from the dispenser on the table. "Please, don't worry. It was just an accident." He bent down and started to pick up the larger pieces of the broken glass, disregarding the wine soaking into his sleeve. "Look, nobody got hurt. It's just wine. It will wash out." The waitress dropped to her knees beside him, trying to stop him. "No, please, sir, let me do that." "I'm so sorry, I'm such an idiot," she choked out, tears now spilling down her cheeks. "You're not an idiot," the old man said firmly but kindly, placing a hand gently on her shoulder to stop her from grabbing the sharp glass. "Accidents happen to everyone. Please stand up. Don't cut yourself." But the commotion had drawn the attention of the one person everyone wanted to avoid. The manager, who had been near the kitchen, saw the spill and the broken glass. His face instantly darkened. To him, this wasn't an accident. It was another problem in a night full of problems. It was a waste of product, a mess to clean up, and a disruption to his service. He stormed across the restaurant, pushing past chairs, his eyes locked on the waitress. "What is going on here?" He barked as he approached, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The waitress scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes on her arm. I bumped into someone and dropped the wine. I'm cleaning it up, I promise." The manager ignored her explanation. He stepped right up to the table, looking at the mess on the floor and the stained tablecloth. He didn't even look at the customer yet. He was entirely focused on the staff member. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "We are in the middle of a rush, and you are smashing glass and spilling expensive wine? This is coming out of your paycheck. How many times do I have to tell you to watch where you are going? You are useless if you can't even carry a bottle without spilling it." The waitress shrank back, her shoulders hunching over as if she could physically make herself smaller to hide from his words. "I'm sorry," she squeaked. "It was really crowded. I don't want excuses." The manager roared, his face turning a deep shade of red. "I want you to do your job. You are an embarrassment to this restaurant. Go to the back and get a mop, and don't come back out here until you can learn to walk." The nearby tables stopped eating. People were staring openly now. The air in the restaurant felt heavy and uncomfortable. The waitress was crying openly now, humiliated by the public dressing down. She turned to run to the kitchen, but the old man stepped in front of her. Blocking her path, the manager was taken aback by the interruption. He finally shifted his glare from the crying girl to the customer standing in front of him. He looked at the man's wine-stained jacket, expecting to see an angry customer demanding a refund. Instead, he saw a man standing tall with a calm but stern expression. "This is none of your business," the manager shot back, pointing a finger at him. "My staff broke the rules, and I am handling it." "I don't think you are handling anything," the old man said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its gentle edge. "You are bullying a young woman who made a simple mistake. She apologized, and I accepted it. There is no need for this spectacle." The manager let out a bitter, sarcastic laugh. "Oh, I see. You're an expert on running a restaurant now? You think because you spilled some wine on yourself that you know how to manage my staff? I know that you are shouting at a child over a glass of wine, the old man replied, his eyes locking onto the manager's. You need to lower your voice. You are disturbing everyone, and you are being incredibly rude. She was doing her best. You should be ashamed of speaking to anyone like that, let alone your own employees. The dining room was deadly silent now. Every waiter, every cook peering through the kitchen window, and every customer was watching this standoff. The manager felt the eyes of the room on him. He felt a hot flash of anger in his chest that he couldn't control. He didn't care if the guy was a customer. He didn't care if the guy was covered in wine. He felt his authority being challenged in his own restaurant, and his ego was too big to let it slide. Listen to me, the manager said, stepping closer, invading the old man's personal space. I don't know who you think you are, but you don't get to come in here and tell me how to talk to my staff. You are just a customer. You eat the food, you pay the bill, and you leave. You don't give the orders here. I do. The old man didn't flinch. He held his ground. I may just be a customer, he said quietly, but I know a leader when I see one. And you, sir, are no leader. You are just a man who has lost his temper, and you are about to make a very big mistake. The manager laughed again, a cruel sound. The only mistake here was you walking through my door. Now sit down and shut up, or you can leave right now without your dinner. The tension in the room was like a tightrope ready to snap. The waitress stood behind the old man, her hands over her mouth, terrified of what the manager would do next. The old man looked the manager dead in the eyes, and for the first time that night, the manager felt a strange flicker of doubt, but it was too late to back down now. The fuse had been lit, and the explosion was inevitable. The silence that followed the manager's threat was heavy and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every person in the dining room was holding their breath. Waiters froze halfway to tables, and customers stopped chewing, their eyes wide as they watched the drama unfold at the small table in the back. The old man didn't move. He stood his ground, looking at the manager not with fear, but with a look of calm disappointment that somehow made the manager even angrier. The manager's heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he could hear it in his ears. He felt his face burning hot, a mix of embarrassment and rage. He fell backed into a corner. In his mind, he was the captain of a sinking ship, and this customer man who didn't know the first thing about the heat of the kitchen or the pressure of the rush was trying to mutiny. The manager couldn't handle it. He snapped, "You think you can talk to me like that?" The manager yelled, his voice cracking slightly. He took a step closer, getting right in the old man's face. The smell of wine hung in the air between them. "You think because you have a little money and buy a nice dinner that you own this place? You don't know anything. You sit there in your comfortable chair with your book while we are back here, breaking our backs to feed people like you." The waitress reached out, gently touching the manager's arm. "Please, sir, please stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's my fault, just let it go." The manager jerked his arm away from her as if he had been burned. He didn't even look at her. He was too focused on the enemy in front of him. "Stay out of this," he barked at her. Then he turned his burning gaze back to the old man. The manager pointed a shaking finger at the exit sign glowing red above the door. "You want to give me advice? You want to tell me how to treat my staff?" The manager shouted, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "Then get out. You are done here. I don't need your business. I don't need people like you coming in here and acting like you own the place. You are banned. Leave." The old man slowly closed his book. He looked at the manager with a steady, piercing gaze that seemed to cut right through the anger. "I am simply asking for common decency," the old man said, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise of the room. "You are humiliating this young woman over an accident. If this is how you handle stress, perhaps you are the one who doesn't belong here." That was the final straw. The manager's vision practically went red. He felt a total loss of control, a switch flipping in his brain that turned off all logic and reason. He didn't care about the other customers watching. He didn't care about the expensive plates or the reputation of the restaurant. He just wanted to win. He wanted to prove he was the boss. "I don't care what you think." The manager screamed, his voice reaching a volume that made the busboys in the back jump. He grabbed a menu from a nearby table and slammed it down onto the stained tablecloth, right in front of the old man. "You're just an arrogant old fool. You think you know better than me? I've been working in this industry for 20 years. I run this floor. Not you, not anybody." The manager leaned in, his face inches from the old man's, spitting as he spoke. "Get your coat, get your book, and get out of my restaurant, now, before I have the police drag you out for trespassing." The old man didn't flinch at the threat. He didn't argue. He didn't shout back. He simply stood there, taking the verbal abuse, absorbing it with a dignity that made the manager look small and childish. After a long moment, the old man gave a single, slow nod. He placed the book back into his pocket and buttoned his wine-stained jacket. "You are making a very sad mistake," the old man said softly. "But if you insist, I will leave." "You're damn right I insist," the manager shouted, throwing his hands up in the air victoriously. "And don't bother coming back. We don't serve people who insult the staff." The irony of his statement, yelling at the customer to defend the staff, was lost on him in his rage. The old man turned to the waitress. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. He reached out and gently patted her hand. "Keep your head up, my dear," he said kindly. "You did a wonderful job. Do not let him take that away from you." The manager watched this interaction and felt another spike of fury. "Don't talk to her," he yelled. "Go." The old man ignored him. He gave the waitress one last reassuring smile and then turned toward the door. He walked slowly, with his back straight, moving through the crowded dining room. As he passed, the other customers watched him in awe. Some looked at the manager with looks of disgust and disbelief. A few people put their napkins on the table and reached for their wallets, signaling that they were leaving too. They didn't want to eat in a place where the manager behaved like a maniac. The manager stood by the table, his chest heaving, his hands clenching and unclenching into fists. He watched the old man push open the heavy wooden door and step out into the night. The bell chimed again, a cheerful sound that mocked the tense atmosphere. Once the door clicked shut, the manager let out a long, loud exhale, trying to calm himself down. He looked around the room. Everyone was still staring at him. "What are you all looking at?" He snapped at the room. "Get back to your food? The show is over." The room slowly came back to life, but the energy was ruined. The happy buzz of conversation was gone, replaced by uneasy whispers and nervous glances. The manager looked at the waitress, who was wiping her eyes with a rag. She looked terrified to even look at him. "And you," the manager said, his voice still harsh, though quieter now, "clean this mess up. And if you drop one more thing tonight, you're gone." He didn't wait for her answer. He turned on his heel and marched toward the kitchen, needing to escape the judgment he felt from the customers. As he walked away, he told himself he had done the right thing. He had protected his authority. He had shown that customer who was boss. He didn't know that the quiet man in the tweed jacket wasn't just a tourist or a regular customer. He didn't know that he had just kicked the most important person in the entire company out of the building. He just felt the sweet, temporary relief of letting his temper take control, oblivious to the disaster that was about to rain down on him. The manager didn't go back to the dining room immediately. He walked straight past the line of cooks, who were staring at him with wide eyes, and pushed through the swinging doors of the walk-in refrigerator. The moment the heavy metal door clicked shut, the noise of the restaurant vanished. It was replaced by the low, constant hum of the cooling unit and the sound of his own ragged breathing inside. The air was freezing, a sharp contrast to the heat of his anger. He leaned his back against the metal shelves, surrounded by crates of lettuce and stacks of cheese. He closed his eyes and took deep, gulping breaths, trying to steady his racing heart. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the massive amount of adrenaline still pumping through his veins. He had no right, the manager whispered to the empty air. Who does he think he is? He told himself he had done the right thing. In his mind, he was the one protecting the restaurant. Customers thought they could do whatever they wanted, talk down to staff, break rules, disrespect the management. Someone had to draw the line. He convinced himself that by kicking the old man out, he was showing his staff that he was strong, that he wouldn't let anyone walk all over them. He felt a twisted sense of pride. Like a soldier who had just won a small battle, he stayed in the fridge for a few more minutes until his face stopped burning. When he finally stepped back out into the kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted. The cooks were working, but the usual shouting and joking were gone. The kitchen was dead silent except for the sizzling of pans and the clinking of utensils. The sous chef refused to make eye contact with him. The manager ignored them. He grabbed a rag and wiped the sweat from his forehead, putting his game face back on. He decided he would go back onto the floor, act like nothing happened, and show everyone that the night was still under control. But when he pushed through the doors to the dining room, he felt something was wrong. The energy in the room had changed completely. It wasn't just quiet. It was uncomfortable. The happy buzz of a Friday night service had been sucked out of the air. People were whispering to each other over their meals, glancing toward the back of the room where the incident had happened. Even worse, 3 tables had already paid their bills and left. Half-eaten plates of food sat on the tables, cleared by busboys who looked nervous. The manager frowned. He felt a defensive anger rising in his chest again. Why were they leaving? Why did they care? They were just jealous that he had the guts to say what everyone else was thinking. He walked past the waitress, who was wiping down a table with her head down. She looked like she had been crying for a long time. He wanted to tell her to pull herself together, but he held back. He needed to check on the rest of the room as he walked toward the front of the restaurant to check on the hostess. He saw a small group of people standing near the entrance. It was the hostess and the older man. The manager stopped in his tracks. His jaw clenched tight. Why was he still here? He had told him to leave. He had kicked him out. The manager marched over, his fists balled at his sides. He was ready to call the police if he had to. He was ready to make an even bigger scene if it meant getting this man out of his hair for good. He felt invincible in his anger. "I thought I told you to get out," the manager said loudly as he approached. He didn't care who heard him. "Are you waiting for a refund?" "Because you aren't getting one. You caused this mess." The hostess looked terrified. She stepped between them, holding up her hands. "Sir, please, he just needs to—" "Get out of the way," the manager snapped, pushing past her. He got right up to the old man looming over him. "This is private property. If you don't leave right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Do you understand me?" The old man didn't look scared. He didn't even look annoyed. He looked at the manager with a gaze that was calm, almost pitying. The man was standing tall, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a teacher waiting for a student to finish throwing a tantrum. "There is no need for threats," the old man said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the manager's shouting. "I am leaving, just as you asked. But before I go, the young lady at the podium informed me that she does not have the owner's direct contact information. I asked her to find you so I could give it to you." The manager let out a harsh, sarcastic laugh. "The owner? You want to complain to the owner? Go ahead, call the corporate number. Write a letter. I'm sure they'll love to hear about how you spilled wine and harassed my staff." "I don't need to complain," the old man said. He reached into the inside pocket of his wine-stained tweed jacket. "I just want to leave you with something. In case you need to explain why the restaurant is emptying out on a Friday night." The old man pulled out a small, crisp object. It wasn't a complaint form. It was a business card. It was thick, high-quality cream cardstock with elegant gold lettering. He held it out between 2 fingers. "Take it," the old man said. The manager stared at the card. He hesitated for a second, confused. This wasn't how these interactions usually went. Usually people would storm out cursing or ask to speak to the corporate office. This calmness was unnerving. With a sneer, the manager snatched the card from the man's hand. "Fine," the manager growled. "I'll file this away in the trash. Now get out." He looked down at the card, ready to read some generic title and toss it. But as his eyes focused on the name and the logo printed in the center, his breath caught in his throat. The air in his lungs suddenly felt very cold. The logo at the top of the card was the same symbol that was on the employee paychecks. It was the same symbol that was on the lease papers for the building, and the name printed below it wasn't just a customer's name. It was the name of the investment firm that owned the entire chain of restaurants. And directly under the firm's name, it listed the position, chairman and CEO. The manager's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. He looked up from the card, his mouth slightly open, and really looked at the old man for the first time. He noticed the quality of the shoes, the way the man held himself, the calm authority that radiated from him. This wasn't just a random customer. This was the man who signed the checks. This was the man who decided if the restaurant stayed open or closed. The old man didn't say a word. He just watched the realization dawn on the manager's face. He saw the color drain from the manager's skin, turning him pale white. He saw the arrogant posture collapse, the shoulders slumping forward. You're... The manager stammered, his voice suddenly weak and small. All the anger had evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, gripping fear in the pit of his stomach. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Yes, the old man said simply. I was in the city tonight to decide whether to renew the lease on this location and approve the funding for your expansion. I thought I would get a more honest experience if I dined anonymously. The manager felt his knees go weak. He gripped the edge of the hostess' stand to keep from falling. The expansion. The lease. That was what the manager had been working toward for 2 years. That was why he had been pushing the staff so hard, why he was so stressed. And in 5 minutes of blind rage, he had just destroyed it. I didn't know, the manager whispered, his voice trembling. I am so sorry. I was just trying to... The old man held up a hand to stop him. He didn't want to hear the excuses. You treated a young woman who made a mistake with cruelty. You treated a customer with disrespect. You allowed your temper to control you. I have seen enough to make my decision. The old man turned to the hostess, who was standing there with her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide as saucers. He smiled at her gently. Thank you for your help, my dear. You handled a very difficult situation with grace. You're welcome, sir, she squeaked. Then, without another look at the manager, the old man turned and walked out the front door. The bell chimed again, a cheerful sound that now sounded like a funeral toll to the manager. The door swung shut, and the old man disappeared into the night. The manager stood frozen in the lobby. He looked down at the business card in his hand. It felt heavy, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The silence of the restaurant was louder now. He looked around and saw the entire staff watching him. The cooks were peeking through the kitchen window. The waiters were staring. The waitress was still in the back, wiping tears from her eyes. He could feel the judgment hanging in the air. He didn't feel like a strong leader anymore. He just felt small. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his life was about to change forever. The manager stood alone in the lobby of the restaurant, the heavy wooden front door closed against the night air. He was still clutching the business card, his knuckles white. The silence in the restaurant was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind of heavy, shocked silence that follows a disaster. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the low murmurs of confused customers who were trying to finish their meals without making eye contact with anyone. Inside his chest, the manager's heart was beating a frantic, irregular rhythm. The anger that had fueled him just moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, paralyzing fear. He looked down at the card again. The gold lettering seemed to mock him. Chairman and CEO, the man he had screamed at, the man he had humiliated and thrown out like a piece of trash, owned the building. He owned the chairs, the plates, the food, and the very air the manager was breathing. He looked up and saw the staff staring at him. The fear they used to have was gone, replaced by something else, pity, perhaps, or a strange curiosity. They knew something had happened. They knew he had made a terrible mistake. The waitress from the back was standing near the kitchen door, her eyes wide. She didn't know who the customer was, but she knew the manager's reaction meant he was powerful. The manager tried to move. but his feet felt like they were made of lead. He felt a desperate urge to chase the old man down, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to explain that he was just stressed, that he wasn't usually like that. But he couldn't. He knew it was useless. You couldn't unsay the things he had screamed. You couldn't unkick the owner of the company out of his own restaurant. 20 minutes passed, though it felt like 20 years. The dining room had cleared out significantly. People didn't want to stay in a place where the manager was clearly losing his mind. Finally, a pair of bright headlights swept across the front windows. A black sedan pulled up right to the curb. The manager watched, his stomach dropping. As the restaurant owner, the man who had hired him, the man he reported to every week, stepped out of the car, the owner looked frantic. He was dressed in casual clothes, clearly called away from his home or his family. He rushed to the door, pushed it open, and marched inside. When he saw the manager standing there, looking pale and guilty, the owner stopped dead in his tracks. "What is going on?" the owner demanded, breathless. "I just got off the phone with the chairman. He told me he was at my restaurant and that he just got kicked out by a lunatic manager. Please tell me he was joking." The manager opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say it was a misunderstanding, but the truth was written all over his face. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet his boss's eyes. He was interfering, the manager managed to whisper, his voice cracking. There was a spill. A waitress dropped wine. He was telling me how to do my job. I didn't know who he was. I swear, I didn't know. The owner stared at him in disbelief. You didn't know? Does it matter? You screamed at a customer? You threw him out? The owner looked around the empty dining room, seeing the mess, the stained tablecloth in the corner, the unhappy staff. The chairman said you were abusive. He said you bullied your staff in front of him. He was defending her. The manager said, his voice rising in desperation. I was just trying to maintain order. It was a crazy night. The chef was sick. Everyone was calling out. The owner held up a hand, cutting him off. He looked tired. He looked at the manager with a gaze that was final and absolute. I don't want to hear excuses about the chef. I don't want to hear about the stress. The chairman told me that he was here to decide on renewing our lease and funding the expansion, and he just told me it's all off. He said he won't do business with people who treat others like that. The manager felt his knees go weak. He leaned against the hostess stand for support. No, he whispered. Please, no, I need this job. I've worked here for years. I can fix this. Let me call him. I'll apologize. You can't fix this, the owner said softly. He is a good man, but he doesn't change his mind. And honestly, after hearing how you acted tonight, I don't want you representing my restaurant either. I trusted you to run this place. I trusted you to lead these people. And tonight you embarrassed me and you hurt this business. The owner walked over to the podium where the waitress was standing. He gently pulled the restaurant key from the hook. Then he walked back to the manager. He held out his hand. I need your keys, the owner said. I need your building pass. And I need you to go home. Tears welled up in the manager's eyes. For the first time that night, he didn't feel anger. He felt small. He felt empty. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his massive ring of keys. They clinked together as he placed them into the owner's palm. It was a sound that marked the end of his career. Please, the manager begged, his voice breaking. I have a mortgage. I have a family. Don't do this. You should have thought about that before you lost your temper, the owner said. He didn't sound cruel, just sad. You let the stress get to you. You let your ego control you. You ruined this yourself. Go home now. The staff and I will close up. The manager turned around. He didn't look at the staff. He couldn't bear to see the look of relief on their faces. He walked toward the back office to get his personal bag, then walked through the kitchen. The cook stopped working to watch him go. They didn't say anything, but the silence was louder than any insult. He felt like a ghost walking through a world that no longer belonged to him. He pushed open the back door. and stepped out into the cold alleyway behind the restaurant. The smell of grease and garbage filled the air. He walked around to the front of the building and stood on the sidewalk. Under the warm glow of the Oak and Ember sign, he looked through the large glass window. Inside, he could see the owner talking to the waitress. He was putting a hand on her shoulder, smiling kindly, comforting her. The other servers were gathering around, smiling too. For the first time in weeks, the dining room looked peaceful. Without the manager there to scream and stress everyone out, the tension had evaporated. The team looked like a team again. The manager watched them, feeling an intense wave of jealousy and regret. He realized then that he wasn't the hero of his own story. He was the villain. He was the obstacle that had been standing in the way of these people being happy. He had worked so hard for so long, thinking that being tough and loud was the only way to succeed. But in the end, it was his inability to be kind, his inability to control himself that had destroyed him. He looked down the street, where the black sedan of the chairman had disappeared. One moment of anger. One bad decision. That was all it took to erase years of hard work. He adjusted his jacket, which felt too big on him now, and turned away from the restaurant. He didn't know where he was going to go. He didn't know how he was going to explain this to his wife. He just started walking down the dark sidewalk, alone with his thoughts, disappearing into the night just like the old man had done, but without any of the dignity. The city lights flickered around him, but for him, the lights had truly gone out.